We talk a lot about accountability, but today we're really going into two worlds that define that word in completely different ways.
Radically different ways.
It feels like we're standing at this intersection of two spheres.
Right.
Both have these immense stakes,
Right.
where any failure is just catastrophic.
And yet the way they handle governance is, well, it's fundamentally opposed.
On one side, you have the clinical world, these quiet, almost invisible systemic risks in healthcare.
We're talking about medical imaging, radiation therapy.
Yeah, the actual physics and chemistry of saving lives.
Yeah.
Where being off by a fraction of a millimeter or a millisecond can cause permanent, devastating harm.
So governance there has to be obsessive. It's decentralized, it's technical, and most importantly, it's all quantified.
And then on the other side, you have the immense sort of absolute risks that come with executive power.
Where decisions are often made by just one person.
Exactly. The authority to launch a military strike thousands of miles away, or the unchecked power to pardon a convicted felon, just erasing years of judicial punishment.
And the thread connecting these two, it's governance. How do these institutions manage catastrophic risk?
And how quickly does everything fall apart when that governance fails? It doesn't matter if you're in a sterile clinic or the highest halls of power.
Our sources for this are incredibly detailed.
They really are. We've got a comprehensive guide on safety culture in medical imaging from the ISRRT.
Then there's a really sharp legal critique of U.S. military actions abroad.
And finally, a deep statistical dive into the very opaque process of presidential pardons.
Which was conducted by the Office of the Pardon Attorney itself.
So our mission today is to pull out the fundamental lessons on how these institutions either manage or catastrophically fail to manage risk.
And to really analyze what happens when accountability is spread out among a team of highly trained experts versus when it's absolute.
When it rests on the shoulders of just one person.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So if we start with that first source, the medical environment, you see a system that views failure, well, not as something inevitable, but as a structural flaw.
A flaw to be anticipated.
And engineered out of the system. This whole approach, it's born from the catastrophic potential of things like ionizing radiation.
And the sheer complexity of the equipment.
Right. So the ISRRT guide, it doesn't just list safety rules, it demands a culture of safety.
A culture, not just compliance.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, they give us the foundational definition here. And a safety culture is not a checklist.
It's not just ticking boxes.
No. It's defined as the assembly of characteristics, attitudes, and behaviors in individuals, organizations, everyone, that establishes safety as the overriding priority.
So it's about creating a collective mindset.
Yes, a mindset where safety is just inherent in every single action you take, not something you think about afterward.
That distinction, culture versus compliance, that feels huge. Compliance is just following the letter of the law. But a culture means you're instinctively looking for potential harm, even when no one's watching. And given the stakes here, the cost of a weak culture must be immediate and severe.
Oh, it is. A weak safety culture is documented as a major contributor to medical errors.
And in this context, that means what?
It translates directly into poor quality medical results. So, misdiagnoses, incorrect treatment planning, unnecessary radiation exposure.
And I imagine it drives up costs too.
Absolutely. And it severely impacts patient and worker morale and performance. Think about the specific technical risks.
Okay.
A weak culture might tolerate, say, improper equipment calibration. That leads to inconsistent dose delivery in radiotherapy.
Or in a diagnostic scan.
Inadequate patient positioning.
Yeah.
Then you have to do repeat exposures. A strong culture, on the other hand, it reduces those errors. It improves the accuracy of the diagnosis, the treatment, and it just makes the whole department more efficient.
It forces you to be proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly.
And this isn't just like a friendly suggestion. This is a global imperative.
Absolutely. The need for this robust culture is recognized all over the world. The Bonn Call for Action specifically calls for strengthening radiation safety culture in healthcare.
And it goes even higher than that.
It does. Even the 72nd World Health Assembly, the WHA 72, included radiation in a list of the 10 biggest patient safety challenges facing the world today.
So it's right up there with things like medication errors or sepsis.
It is. That's how seriously the global community takes this invisible risk.
So that brings us to the organizational framework. It's not enough to just say the CEO is responsible. The accountability has to be specialized. It's distributed.
The whole structure is incredibly rigorous, it's systematic, and a foundational piece of it is something called clinical audit.
Okay, what is that?
It's a systematic process that's just designed to improve patient care and outcomes. It works by reviewing current practices against predefined, explicit criteria.
So you're measuring against a known standard.
A known, quantifiable standard, like the BSSD Euratom directive. It ensures the review is structured and focused.
And I see here that everyone has to participate. It's not some inspection from on high.
Exactly. The duty of care falls on everyone, including the radiographers. They have to be part of these audits to ensure good patient outcomes. That fosters that collective culture we were talking about.
Right. It reinforces the idea that it's everyone's job.
Precisely. And then you get into the more technical QA tools like image reject analysis or IRA.
Image truth analysis.
It's a core QA mechanism. It mandates that you save all the rejected images, the ones that are clinically unacceptable, and then you evaluate them periodically.
That sounds tedious, but I imagine the insight you get from that is enormous. What does it actually reveal?
IRA is crucial. Its main goal is to reduce repeated exposures, which means less unnecessary radiation for the patient. And you do that by correcting the underlying causes.
So it tracks failure patterns.
Yes. Are images being rejected because of staff errors, like poor patient instruction, or is it a technical failure?
Like the machine itself is acting out.
A generator issue, grid misalignment, processing artifacts, that data then gets channeled directly back into targeted training for staff or into equipment maintenance schedules.
So it closes the loop.
It closes the loop between technical performance and staff competence. The system is constantly improving itself.
That proactive learning loop, feeding data from failure directly back into training. That seems to be the very definition of a strong culture. But that culture also has to rely on transparency when people inevitably make mistakes.
And that's where the system for adverse event reporting comes in. A vital part of this is having a systematic way to record, monitor, and evaluate every single adverse event and near miss.
And they use electronic systems for this, I assume.
They do, but crucially, the system has to promote a no-blame culture.
Okay, a no-blame culture. That sounds almost paradoxical. If there's no blame, where's the individual accountability for negligence?
And that's the tension, right? The no-blame policy is for errors that come from systemic failures or fatigue or just honest mistakes in a high-pressure system. The goal is to learn.
So you learn from the system's flaws.
But, and this is the key, the system is backed up by strict, specialized accountability defined by the roles themselves. Okay. So gross misconduct or negligence, doing something clearly outside the rules, that's still on you.
That is still subject to disciplinary action. The governance just ensures that the responsibility for preventing the systemic failure is distributed and technical.
Let's get into those technical roles, because this is where accountability gets atomized. You can't just point vaguely at management.
No. Specific people hold specific legal and technical mandates. First, you have the Radiation Protection Advisor, or RPA.
The RPA.
This is a subject matter expert. Could be external, could be a senior person internally. They provide independent advice to managers and staff on everything related to ionizing radiation.
So they're the regulatory compass for the department.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Then you have the deeply technical role, the medical physics expert, or MPE.
Right.
The MPE is appointed by the employer to handle the physics and performance side of things. Their core job is supporting dose optimization, conducting the QA on all the radiological equipment, and giving detailed advice on radiation protection for the patients. They make sure the machines are working as safely as the laws of physics will allow.
Exactly. And then on the floor, doing the daily enforcement, you have the Radiation Protection Supervisor, the RPS.
So they're on the ground.
Correct.
Ah.
Usually a senior staff member who supervises the daily enforcement of all the measures in the local rules. They're checking compliance with barriers, distances, safety procedures, every single shift.
And then holding it all together is the departmental manager.
The manager has the overall institutional responsibility. They implement the safety policy, they maintain all the training records, they assure ongoing competence. They're the ones who take all the advice from the RPA and the MPE and turn it into policies that can actually be enforced.
This whole structure ensures no technical detail gets missed.
Yeah.
And now we get to how they quantify all this risk, the mechanism that forces them to act, the risk register.
Yes, using the REG status, red, amber, green. This status gives you an undeniable, quantifiable measure of risk. And the rating is calculated by adding the impact score, the consequence if something happens, and the likelihood score, the probability of it happening.
Okay, let's make this real. Walk me through a catastrophic scenario using that 1 to 5 scale.
Okay, let's imagine a facility where a patient's life support depends on a mechanical hoist to get them onto a treatment table.
High stakes.
Very. So for the impact score, Let's say that hoist fails while moving a critically unstable patient. It results in serious injury or death.
That's a 5. An undeniable 5. Extreme catastrophic impact.
A clear 5. The service is interrupted, there's irreversible harm to the patient.
Great, so impact is 5. Now, likelihood.
Let's assume the manager has been ignoring the mandated 6-month maintenance checks. The hoist is visibly worn. Failure is highly likely.
So that would also be a 5. Highly probable frequent.
Exactly. So you add them up. Impact 5 plus likelihood 5 gives you a score of 10.
Maximum red alert status.
And the governance structure makes ignoring that score impossible. It bypasses the manager and goes right up the institutional chain of command.
That's the power of quantification. It just removes all ambiguity.
A number determines the priority. If the score is 10, the action is mandatory and immediate. Stop the procedure, fix the hoist, and investigate why the checks were missed.
And beyond these abstract scores, the physical safety measures themselves are just governed by minute detail. You mentioned the hoist maintenance.
Yes, the focus on manual handling is critical. It's a huge risk for musculoskeletal injury to staff and, of course, potential harm to patients.
So there's a hierarchy for it.
A 3-part hierarchy. First, you avoid hazardous manual handling altogether if you can. If you can't, you assess the operation. And third, you reduce the risk as much as is reasonably practicable.
And the guidance says.
The guidance is explicit. Manual lifting should always be the last resort.
And if you use mechanical lifts, like a hoist,
the system mandates an external statutory safety check. The LLR 1998 regulations require that any equipment used for lifting a person has to be checked by a qualified independent person every 6 months.
I want to pause on that detail for a second. A 6-month external safety check on a patient hoist. It seems so simple, but it perfectly captures this entire governing philosophy.
How so?
In this world, you don't rely on trust. You rely on scheduled, externally verified checks for every single piece of equipment that touches a human life.
That meticulousness is absolutely key. And it's such a sharp contrast to systems that rely on individual discretion. Here, the governance is written right into the mechanics of the equipment.
Now, zooming back to the radiation risks, there are also specific quantified limits for staff exposure. Right.
Staff dose monitoring is essential, yes. Departments have to do risk assessments to estimate likely doses and determine if an employee needs to be designated as a classified worker.
The classified worker. And
that means the risk assessment shows they're likely to exceed 0.3 of the set annual dose limits.
Can you put that in context?
Sure. The annual whole body dose limit for an occupational worker is 20 millisieverts per year, or MSV. So you get classified if you're likely to exceed 6 millisieverts.
And that triggers more oversight.
Much more. These workers require personal monitoring, and the rooms they work in are automatically classified as controlled areas, which means stricter procedures. This is especially for staff in high-dose interventional procedures.
And finally, the patient gatekeeper, informed consent. Even with all these safety measures, patient autonomy is still paramount.
All procedures require informed consent from the patient or their authorized person. This is rooted in the ethical and legal principle of bodily autonomy.
The right to determine what happens to your own body.
Exactly. And the consent has to be truly informed. The patient has to understand the procedure, the risks, the alternatives.
And the law takes this very seriously.
Extremely seriously. Touching a patient without their consent, unless there's a lawful exception like an emergency, can legally amount to assault. Which is why complex procedures require written, signed documentation. It just emphasizes the meticulousness you need to navigate both the technical and the ethical risk at the same time.
So let's just take a breath and synthesize this first part. We have a clinical governance system where every potential failure is quantified. Every piece of equipment is externally checked. Accountability is diffused among technical experts.
The system is designed to prevent action if it can't be justified.
Okay, now, we pivot completely. We leave the world of ARGA scores and RPAs, and we move to the executive branch. If healthcare manages risk through this hyper-quantification and distributed accountability, how is risk managed when the stakes involve international conflict?
An absolute unilateral discretion.
The contrast could not be more vivid. We're going from microscopic liability sharing to a realm where discretion is singular and immense.
The checks here are primarily legal and political. They are not technical and quantifiable.
So let's start by analyzing the constraints on the president's authority to use military force abroad.
Specifically, we're looking at the legal ramifications of U.S. military strikes against foreign vessels, interpreted by legal experts.
And what's the top line finding?
The analysis immediately raises the prospect of what they call dual illegality. The strikes are seen as potentially unlawful under two totally separate frameworks.
Which are?
International law, both jus ad bellum and jus in bello, and U.S. domestic law concerning executive authority.
Okay, let's break down that international legal framework first. The law governing the decision to use force.
So under international law, the core restraint is the UN Charter's Article 2.4. It broadly prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state.
But there are exceptions.
Two very narrow exceptions. If it's authorized by the UN Security Council or, and this is the crucial one, when it's exercised in self-defense under Article 51, if an armed attack occurs.
Right. And the U.S. justification for these strikes was self-defense.
It was self-defense against non-state actors. In this case, drug cartels and smuggling networks operating from foreign vessels.
And this is where the legal interpretation gets tricky.
It hits a major hurdle. Precedent from the International Court of Justice, particularly the Nicaragua v. United States case, makes it clear that self-defense against non-state actors is only permissible if those actors have launched an armed attack of sufficient scale and gravity.
And drug trafficking, no matter how serious, it doesn't meet that specific legal threshold.
Exactly. Narcotics trafficking, while it's criminal and destabilizing, it just doesn't constitute the level of armed attack that the ICJ precedent requires to justify a military response with airstrikes.
Because if you lower that threshold,
If you lower it to include any significant criminal activity, then the UN Charter's prohibition becomes functionally meaningless. Any state could claim self-defense based on economic or criminal threats. It weakens the entire foundation of post-World War II international law.
but even if you could somehow stretch the definition of armed attack, the action still has to meet two other requirements, right? Necessity and proportionality.
And this is where the justification really breaks down. Let's look at necessity first.
Okay.
Force must be the only reasonable means of stopping the alleged attack. The analysis here argues that the U.S. had significant non-forcible alternatives.
Such as?
Well, robust standard maritime interdiction operations, for one. And there are numerous existing counter-narcotics treaties and cooperative agreements with partners in the region.
So if you haven't exhausted those options,
Then military force cannot be justified as necessary. It loses its defensive justification.
what about proportionality? That limits the scale of the response.
Right. Proportionality demands that the response be limited to what's required to neutralize the attack itself.
The threat was drug smuggling vessels.
The response involved airstrikes, destroying vessels, and killing dozens of people far from any active hostilities. The legal critique argues that the magnitude of that response was just vastly disproportionate to the localized threat posed by the smuggling.
So on the international stage, the action is heavily constrained.
Yeah.
Now let's shift to U.S. domestic law. How did the executive branch overstep its authority there?
Domestically, the strikes are assessed as unlawful because they exceeded the scope of presidential power. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war.
And you typically need a congressional authorization for use of military force, an AUMF.
Correct. Without a declaration of war or an AUMF, the president's unilateral authority is extremely narrow. It's generally limited to repelling an imminent armed attack against the United States itself,
And these operations.
interdicting and destroying vessels in foreign waters. They just don't meet the criteria of preventing an imminent attack on the U.S. mainland. By acting without Congress, the executive branch assumed powers reserved for the legislature.
So the implication here is massive. If a global power decides that this kind of activity justifies unilateral military force, it just erodes the entire rules-based international order.
What's really concerning is that this type of action weakens the rules that distinguish law from power. It sets a dangerous precedent. If the U.S. claims this right, it invites other states facing, say, domestic terrorism or criminal organizations to make similar claims to justify military action against their neighbors. The result is just a global decrease in the restraint on using force.
This just highlights the nature of accountability. In the clinical world, it's quantified and technical. Here, it's entirely dependent on legal interpretation and the political will to actually constrain executive authority.
It is.
So now we shift to what is maybe the president's most singular, unchecked domestic power: the ability to grant clemency, pardons, commutations.
This power, from Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, is given without limit, except in cases of impeachment.
No congressional or judicial oversight at all.
None. It is the ultimate expression of unilateral discretion. a stark contrast to the distributed accountability we saw in medicine.
But even with that absolute power, there's a huge bureaucratic machine that processes the thousands of requests.
That's the Office of the Pardon Attorney, the OPA, inside the Department of Justice.
The bureaucratic filter.
Exactly. They process every request, they do the investigations, and they provide formal recommendations up the chain to the Deputy Attorney General and finally to the White House Counsel. And this RAND study gives us a fascinating look into the stats of this very opaque process.
So let's walk through the 4 stages of this journey. The stats show it's a gauntlet designed to filter out almost everyone right away.
The filtering starts at stage 1, initial screen or administrative closure. This stage immediately closes about 21% of all petitions.
It's gone. For what?
For failing to meet basic objective standards. For example, less than 5 years have passed since your release or conviction. Or you just submitted an incomplete application. The OPA can just reject them.
Okay, so if you survive that, you move to stage 2.
Stage 2 is the USPO report request. The OPA contacts the U.S. Probation Office to get the pre-sentence report, the PSR, and critically, they ask for the probation office's current view on the petition's merits.
And this consultation is clearly the single biggest bottleneck in the whole process.
It is. The largest single block of petitions, 44% of all of them, are denied a recommendation between stage 2 and stage 3.
Wow.
The review of that PSR and the probation officer's current assessment acts as a major internal check. It flags people who might have misrepresented their history or who just aren't seen as fully rehabilitated.
So less than 35% of the original petitioners even make it past that. Then they face a full background check.
That's stage 3, the full FBI investigation. A comprehensive background check is initiated.
And the FBI report is looking for anything undisclosed.
Right. Subsequent arrests, new financial problems like tax lines, professional misconduct. That kind of information triggers an immediate denial recommendation in about 44% of the cases where they even request the investigation.
So that removes another huge chunk of people.
It does. It shows the extreme burden of proof you need. To get through this, you need an almost perfect record, not just legally, but professionally and financially too.
So only a tiny fraction reaches the final assessment.
That's stage 4, the other source request. Only about 19% of all original petitions get to this level.
And here they talk to the original judge and prosecutor.
OPA seeks input from the sentencing judge and the U.S. attorney in the district of conviction. They ask them if they think a pardon is appropriate now.
And the denial rate is still high, even then.
Still very high. Even at this late stage, 71% of these cases result in a denial recommendation. Ultimately, only about 29% of those who make it all the way to stage 4 are actually deemed worthy of a recommendation for a grant.
So if the overall recommendation rate for those who get past the first filter is just 7.1%, the system is designed to reward a remarkably narrow profile of person.
The OPA is looking for people who demonstrate exemplary post-conviction conduct, who lack an extensive criminal history, and importantly, who have made sustained and significant contributions to the community.
They're looking for profound personal transformation.
That's the goal.
So what does the data say? What statistically determines who gets a grant versus who gets denied?
Well, based on the descriptive statistics, the ideal successful petitioner often aligns with a very specific socioeconomic profile.
Let me guess. Non-violent white-collar crime.
You got it. Tax violations, embezzlement, forgery. They are statistically much more likely to succeed than people convicted of drug or violent offenses.
And the severity of the original sentence. That has to matter.
It matters immensely. Petitioners were significantly more likely to get clemency if they only got probation. That had a 7.9% success rate compared to those who were incarcerated. That rate was only 4.2%.
Which suggests the system favors those whose original crime was seen as less of a serious threat to society.
That's a fair interpretation. But the single most predictive factor, according to the statistical modeling, it all relates to time.
Patience is a prerequisite.
Overwhelmingly significant. Waiting 20 or more years since your conviction or incarceration strongly predicts a higher likelihood of success.
How much higher?
The model shows that waiting 20 plus years gives you a likelihood of getting a pardon that is roughly 18 percentage points greater than for those who waited less time.
18 percentage points. That is an astonishing figure. It means the system is structurally built to resist anything that looks like early forgiveness. 2 decades have to pass.
And that waiting period has to be filled with impeccable conduct. The profile of a successful petitioner demands a spotless life since their conviction.
Stable employment.
Typically 8 or more years, never fired for cause.
And no other issues.
None. No subsequent criminal activity, no evidence of alcohol or substance abuse, no mental health treatment post-conviction, and absolutely no financial difficulties or tax liens. And on top of all that, they have to be active in civic and charitable activities.
And who you know matters. Support from powerful sources makes a difference.
A huge difference. Success was significantly correlated with support from the U.S. Probation Office itself. But more importantly, the ones who got grants often had character references from high-status sources.
Government officials, law enforcement.
Exactly, which suggests that access to the highest levels of professional and political support really helps you navigate this very opaque system.
This profile just raises the inevitable question of racial disparity. The ideal recipient, white-collar crime, stable job, high-level references, that's not a profile that's universally accessible, is it?
No, it isn't. And it's a challenging area to study because the sample size of actual grants is so small. The RAND study tried to control for all the predictor variables.
Offense type, time elapsed, conduct.
Right. And when they controlled for all that, they found no statistically significant difference in the likelihood of a grant between black and white petitioners. But they also drew attention to the raw, uncontrolled data. And that presents a much starker picture of structural disparity.
Where did that show?
For example, during the George W. Bush administration period they studied, the pardon recommendation rate for black petitioners was about 2.9%. For white petitioners, it was substantially higher, at about 11.3%.
That raw gap is glaring. It suggests that while the system's final decision criteria might not be overtly biased, the prerequisites for a successful application,
the types of crimes, the financial stability, the ability to get those high-status references.
they are structurally biased towards certain socioeconomic and racial demographics.
Precisely. The system rewards a highly specific trajectory of rehabilitation, and that trajectory is often more achievable for those who committed white-collar nonviolent offenses and who have the means to remain completely stable and financially secure for 2 solid decades.
So we've covered 2 vastly different landscapes of accountability and risk.
On one hand, the clinical environment.
Right. Where failure is systematically prevented by quantified risk assessments, the RIG system, and this distributed technical accountability through the RPA, the MPE, the RPS.
Every mechanism is designed to constrain human error and demand justification before any action is taken.
And in total contrast, you have the executive branch, wielding powers that are inherently unilateral.
Whether it's military force based on debatable interpretations of international law,
Or the power of clemency, where one person has the constitutional authority to override the entire judicial process. In the clinical world, there are regulatory checks on a patient hoist every 6 months.
enforced by technical experts.
But in the executive sphere, the rules are subject to political interpretation or just absolute discretion. The accountability is so much less precise and so much more dependent on the judgment of one person.
And we've established the statistical profile of that ideal pardon recipient. Waited 2 decades, committed a financial crime, and demonstrated perfect post-conviction conduct, often backed by government references.
The system demands this extreme level of proven rehabilitation and time before it will grant mercy for a federal offense.
So, if the bar for clemency is that high, if it demands decades of proven exemplary conduct and independent affirmation before you can reverse a sentence for a financial crime, should we apply a similar mandatory waiting period or some form of truly independent, quantifiable risk assessment before the president is permitted to exercise this immense power in cases tied to high-stakes political or strategic interests?
That's the ultimate question we have to ask about governance, isn't it? Where does absolute discretion end, and where does institutional, quantified accountability begin?